Okay, so thank you all very much for coming. Welcome to this very special Bhima Ekadashi IPS mentorship program here today with His Holiness Shivaram Swami. He's a person that I think many of you already know very well, but there are a few new faces I see in the crowd, so for the benefit of them, I'll just introduce a little bit about Maharaj. So he came into contact with Krishna consciousness in 1970. And got initiated by Srila Prabhupada in 1973, and 6 years later, 1979, took sannyas initiation. So what that means is he's been practicing Krishna consciousness for over 45 years. That's a really, really long time as an ISKCON man. I'm sure Maharaj has seen a lot, and by now...
Oh, look where I still am.
He's still
45 years, so you really got to pull up your bootstraps. Yeah. Because it takes a lot of work. Even to get nowhere.
He's got somewhere. He's done an amazing job. And he really believes it works. So during that period, 45 years, he's done lots of different services. Book distributor, kirtanir, as we just saw, speaker, author of so many books, temple president, leader of entire yatras. So he was, of course, GBC in the UK for a number of years. And he's currently GBC for 3 countries. They are Hungary, Romania, and Turkey. So lots of responsibility for looking after our international institution. And he's, of course, very well known for establishing the farming community in New Vrajadam in Hungary with those beautiful deities, Sri Sri Radhasham Sundar. Raise your hand if you've been to that amazing place. Absolutely stunning. So thank you very much, Maharaj, for all of the wonderful things.
That's the one right thing you said. Radhasham Sundar are very stunning.
At this point, I'm very glad I'm not debating Maharaj. And I'm only facilitating the debate. So Maharaj has been a big supporter of ISKCON Pandava Sena for a number of years and is a source of inspiration for all of us. Of course, for this program, it's going to be something a little bit different. Normally, we're used to just seeing Maharaj speak, but we thought we'd try something a little bit different. As we know, Maharaj is a scholar, and he's also an expert debater. And what we needed was, we wanted to find someone that was capable of actually debating with Maharaj. Because Maharaj is like a Maharati, so I don't know if you know in the Mahabharata, you've got these personalities that can fight 5,000 people at the same time. So Maharaj isn't going to be taking out his sword, maybe the sword of knowledge, but he'll be debating all of you simultaneously because our other Maharati, Bhuta Bhavana Prabhu, couldn't make it today. So we do have I think it's 7 very brave souls, some would say brave, some would say foolish, who have prepared various topics to debate Maharaj on. They will challenge Maharaj on ISKCON's philosophy, ISKCON's culture, and ISKCON's practice. We also have some anonymous questions that have come in. They were raised by more sensible people that realized if they just slip me a question and without actually showing their face, that might be the most sensible way forward. Some of the debaters will be playing devil's advocate, of course, and others will be raising genuine concerns and queries about the practice of Krishna consciousness. So it should be a really enlightening debate. Clearly, the fear for all of us is that we may offend this personality, and he happens to be really good mates with Krishna. And so he may stop us going back to Godhead, but rest assured, Maharaj will still take us back. So the idea is the 7 people that have prepared will obviously raise the queries and the debates, but all of you can chip in. So please do be brave. I'll be facilitating the debate to the best of my ability. So if you are going on, I will say in very kind words, please move on. So I think we're going to start with our very first person. And
let me just say a few things. You know, this whole debating concept and practice, something that Srila Prabhupada very much introduced, and he trained his disciples like that. Prabhupada would do it on his morning walks. He would do it just in conversations, and he would be very, very provocative. Very often Prabhupada would get very heated, even though he was talking with his disciples, but to them he was talking to scientists or something else like that. That's because you're a demon, and the devotees, my spiritual master's calling me a demon. But certainly it wasn't, there was no offense, and Prabhupada was always encouraging. And Prabhupada wanted to do that because that's what we're faced with in the world outside. So to be quite frank, I'm a very shy person, and the only reason I do this is because that's what Prabhupada did. And that's what actually we should all do. And Prabhupada was extremely bold. Just we're having a conversation on the way here, so I got my adrenaline going by some things I can't quote here in public, especially on video that Srila Prabhupada said. But Prabhupada was extremely bold. He was very true to Vaishnava philosophy. Prabhupada did not care about people's opinions. He didn't want us to care about people's opinions, at least when it came to, are we speaking the truth, or are we trying to be politically correct? Are we repeating Bhagavad Gita, or are we just sort of trying to blend in, be acceptable? What's more important for us, to be accepted as a mainstream religion, or to stick with our principles and values? Now, if you read Prabhupada's books, especially if you listen to Prabhupada's conversations and so on, there's not going to be any doubt as to what the answers are to those questions. Devotees may have doubts if they don't read Prabhupada's writings, and especially these conversations, letters, then it becomes very, very clear. And Prabhupada wanted us to be like that. Okay, go ahead. I could go on, but I don't. I'll just give one example, and I'll just give the non-X-rated version of this example, or at least the what did they say when they censored version. And when Srila Prabhupada told one of his, because right now I'm just listening to 1977 tapes, and it's a certain time in ISKCON's history when ISKCON's being attacked over about when Srila Prabhupada was with us, and it continued especially through the Jonestown. If any of you know what the Jonestown escapade was, 800 people committed suicide by taking poison in, what country was it? South American country. I forgot. Anyway, just look up Jonestown, Google Jonestown, you'll immediately see. And but this was at a certain point where one of his GBC men was actually in court, and it was being argued in High Court, State High Court, New York State High Court, as to whether Krishna consciousness movement is a cult and devotees can just be kidnapped by their parents and deprogrammed, which was thankfully something that never really got off in the UK. When deprogrammer came just the same time as I came here in 1980, he got promptly put on an airplane and sent back to America. All glories to the British system, judicial system. And so Srila Prabhupada, he told devotees, no, when you go to court, first of all, the devotee was wearing a suit. He says, you're a sannyasi, why are you wearing a suit in court? Well, it's more acceptable. We're not interested in being acceptable in court, we're interested in pleasing Krishna. Krishna is going to judge what the decision is, not the judge. So he says, you take your danda, you get dressed in devotee clothes, and you go into court there. And then Prabhupada started saying some things, and Prabhupada said, you tell the judge that, or you tell the court that we're against what this society stands for because this society is a such and such licking society. You can fill in the blank. He said, do you understand what I said? He said, yes. Repeat it. He said, now you say that in court. You have to look up yourself. You can look it up, the conversation, what the blanks are. I won't say it here.
I think they guessed Marge.
May not. So that was Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada, he wanted us to stand up for the truth, what we believed in, and then just have faith in Krishna. And the last week's events of Prime Minister coming here was just that very same thing, was evidence of that very same thing. We present Krishna consciousness, we fight, chant Hare Krishna and fight. Prabhupada said that was the motto that he gave us. And ultimately we would have never thought that the same political party who's trying to destroy Bhaktivedanta Manor, that the Prime Minister is going to come here and do a Bhumi Puja 30 years later. Hare Krishna. Okay, sorry for that. Introduction.
Oh, perfect introduction. And actually built the context really nicely, because, as Maharaj said, when Prabhupada would go on morning walks, he would sometimes come across his disciples and, as part of the debate, actually call them demons. So it's only right that we start with one of Shriram Maharaj's own disciples, who seems to believe that the glories of chanting Hare Krishna are simply imaginary. Now, given that you only got initiated a few years ago, I'm slightly disturbed by this proposal, but please do go ahead and explain.
Who's that? Uh-huh.
And also in Western clothes, interesting.
You can see what the result of that philosophy is.
I was going to take a more humble approach, but I guess if we want to be a bit more enlightening, I guess there is a concern that the Hare Krishna movement could be just another cult. The teachings could be imagination. The effects or the benefits could be, or the claims of previous saints could be imaginary. There are many religions who claim that they are incarnations of such and such personality. It's quite a common thing. For somebody who is from the outside looking in, what evidence is there, or what can we say to show that it's not imaginary and this is authentic?
How do you know anything that you know isn't in your imagination?
Well, this is the thing, you don't. So
you don't?
It's a possibility I have to accept.
How do you know that anything that you learned is not imagination?
Well, I have faith to some degree, but ultimately I have to accept that I could be mistaken. I could be making mistakes. So I guess my approach would be that I may explore something like Krishna consciousness or any other religion, but it would be with an open mind. Whereas in Krishna consciousness, we don't present it as a possibility or here's something for you to explore it. This is the absolute truth.
But my point was that you know everything. How do you know anything that is true? You know everything. You said it because you have faith. I'm not talking about religion. I'm just talking about anything that you know. How do you know that it's true?
But even that is faith.
Yeah, it's faith. It's faith. So we agreed that it's faith, but there's more than faith, right? I mean, how did you get here?
I drove.
Now, how did you know that you were going to get here?
Well, I didn't have faith.
You must have had faith, otherwise you wouldn't have gotten in your car. If you thought that you were going to have an accident, you wouldn't have come here. So you automatically had faith that you weren't going to have an accident. That was one thing. And the other is that you also learned how to drive, didn't you? So before you learned how to drive, you didn't know how to drive. But why did you learn how to drive, or how did you learn how to drive? You learned from someone. Yeah, you learned from someone. So someone taught you how to drive. And once they taught you how to drive, you realized that you could drive?
Yeah.
So is driving, is it imagination that you're here or not? Did you drive here?
I did, yeah.
So that was real. It's a tangible, real, tangible thing. So why do you think that Krishna consciousness is any less tangible?
Well, the person that taught me how to drive is potentially fallible. He may not have taught me certain things.
That's fine, but you can still drive. He may be infallible, but you're still driving.
But as I was driving here,
Because he told you to do something, you had faith in it, you did it, and now you're here. So now you know how to drive. So why do you think that spiritual life or religion is any less tangible than that?
I'm not saying it's less tangible, I'm just saying...
Then put it to use, put it to practice, and then find out.
Is your point that actually it's a self-fulfilling prophecy? So we're told that if we chant Hare Krishna, we'll be happy.
Driving isn't a self-fulfilling prophecy. You know that you were at your home and now you're here.
But I could have had an accident.
You could have had an accident, but you still know how to drive. So you learned how to drive because you followed a certain process and you got a result. So everything is like that. Everything that you learn is like that. You listen to someone, you do what they say. If it doesn't work out, then you know either you did it wrong or they told you something that wasn't true. And if it works, then you've confirmed what both they and other people have also tried, because you're not the only person on the road. So other people follow the same system and they get the same result. So why should this be any different? And it's not just about driving, it's about everything. It's about driving, it's about cooking, it's about everything that you've learned. It's about driving a bike, driving a car, driving whatever you want to do.
Okay, but why Krishna consciousness? Why is that authentic? Why not another?
Everything is authentic if you actually go through the proper process, if there's an authentic process. If someone tells you that you can flap your wings and fly, that will not be authentic. And then when you try to do the experiment off a cliff, then it's not going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. Then you'll crash. But if you learn the right thing, then you'll see the result.
So how do we know it's the right thing?
How do you know you're driving?
Well, I do it.
Yes, so you do it. You're perceiving it. It's a reality, it's happening.
Yeah. So what religions can sometimes do, but there was a story...
It's not religions, it's anything, it's knowledge. Why are you talking about religion? We're talking about knowledge. We're talking about spiritual knowledge. We're talking about knowledge of the soul. I gave you the example of a knowledge of driving. It's just knowledge. You calling it religion, and just because you think it's got a different name, all of a sudden it becomes superstitious. It's science. It's the same science that you apply everywhere, to everything. You call cooking, cooking, but it's a science. Try and tell your wife it's not a science. Try and tell her it's just superstition. It doesn't really taste good, you just think it tastes good.
Well, I could practice some other philosophy.
Practice any philosophy, but it's got to give you the result.
If it feels good, and it's...
Feel good, give the result. What the result is the result meant to feel good? The result is not about feeling good. Spiritual life is not about feeling good. Spiritual life is about knowing and loving God. So if you know God, do you know God? So if you want to know God, then you follow the process. It's science.
Okay, so
Just like driving a car.
So if I follow the process for 20 years... and
Follow the process for 3 years. Follow it for 5 days. You start and you see, you get a certain result.
And how do I know that result isn't an artificial imposition in the mind?
Because it's science. It's the same thing. Driving a car isn't artificial. It's reality. You perceive it.
But I could practice Buddhism or something which...
Practice anything. But ultimately, it's got to give you the result. What kind of result is Buddhism giving you?
It can make people happy. make people...
Fine. If you want to be happy, meditating on nothing, then do that. If you think that that's what the goal of life is. So you do that. But we're saying that if you want to know God and love Him, then you chant Hare Krishna. So you do a different thing. Everyone's not doing the same thing. Religion doesn't mean that everyone does the same thing. Different people have different results, and according different goals, and on the basis of the goal, you do a respective activity or a corresponding activity. So you want to know what God is like, and you want to love Him, then you chant Hare Krishna, and we chant Hare Krishna, then you'll find out. But you can argue about it, but until you do it, how do you know that, driving works? Just because other people are telling you. Maybe they're in delusion, they're not really driving, they're just sitting in the car, and the car is going by itself.
Okay, but if somebody tries it and it doesn't work, then you're just saying, well, you didn't do it properly.
But so many people tried and it does work. Why are you talking about the few people who say that they may not work? Maybe they're doing it wrong. If you're going to go on the basis of what people say, why don't you go on the basis of what the people say who does work, or for whom it works?
Because those people...
Those people are in illusion, but the other people aren't in illusion.
It's possible.
Then it's possible that they're in illusion also?
Yes.
Well, how will you determine the two? Find out for yourself. Otherwise, you just live in this ethereal world where there is no reality, everything's possible, but nothing happens. It's science. Just because you call it religion, don't think it's anything else. It's just knowledge.
So when we say chant Hare Krishna, what are the rules about chanting Hare Krishna?
You come, you stay here, we'll tell you what the rules are, you do it, you follow the principle, you follow the lifestyle, and then you'll see the result.
But doesn't the lifestyle and the rules, that kind of cultivate a certain mentality that makes people submissive and makes them question themselves, makes them more susceptible?
Yes, that's called being intelligent. People are submissive, they question who I am, why I'm suffering. That's called being smart.
But it also stops people from questioning, maybe this isn't right, maybe this isn't really...
No, we encourage people to question whether it's right or wrong. Has anyone ever encouraged you to question God's existence?
But the nature of the rules and the regulations...
Rules and regulations are there. You're talking about all kinds of rules and regulations. You want to block people from their following a certain set of rules and regulations with your rules and regulations.
I'm not proposing any rules and regulations.
Then why are you talking? You're proposing so many things. You want to put gates in, you want to put blocks in terms of people's progress.
No, what I'm saying is that when we have certain rules and regulations, like it's an offence to consider chanting Hare Krishna to the imagination, it immediately kind of closes off your mind and makes you more dogmatic. It makes you less able to question and understand.
No, you question.
It makes you more susceptible to exploitation.
You can question, but ultimately you have so many rules and regulations. You don't question your mother, you don't question your father when they tell you to do something. Why? Because that's the relationship.
But I feel he makes a very strong point, and when people first come to Krishna consciousness, the first perception is that this is another cult. And we have experienced, there's one that was recently just in England, where someone, he created his own cult, and he had these strict rules and regulations, and then people started to believe that he was God, and it's exactly the same points that he's making. So
rules, everyone has rules and regulations. It's a question of what are the rules and regulations about, and where do the rules and regulations come from.
Does anyone else in the audience like to support the point that's been made?
When people make rules and regulations, you can't make rules and regulations. Rules and regulations have to come from God. And you follow those traditional rules and regulations which give a suitable result. And the result is there. You've got a result of a spiritual culture that's been existent for thousands and thousands of years.
But slavery also existed for thousands of years. If the culture is such...
Slavery is not about knowing and loving God. So why you bring it up?
Because
War's been existing for thousands of years, and there's so many rules about people entering into the army and following rules. And without question, listening to their captain or general. That doesn't necessarily mean that armies are bad things, just because people have to follow what they do. You can decide whether you want to join the army or not, but once you join the army, then you have to do what they say.
So I think that brings us on perfectly, actually, to one of the arguments you were going to make. So this is Jessel. His argument was ISKCON's culture.
You finish this one?
Yeah, I think it leads very nicely onto this one.
Okay.
Because his argument is ISKCON's culture is creating individuals who are dogmatic, institutionalized, and elitist.
You sound pretty dogmatic.
So, going on the point of dogma, the idea of rules.
What's dogma?
So
Define
dogma,
it.
Define dogma.
Yeah.
It's following something just for the sake of following it.
Do you follow your father? Just for the sake of following him?
No.
You don't follow your father.
So my point
I've
is,
known you since you were that small. You follow your father.
That's inside information there. That's going to be struck out of the debate, I'm afraid.
Why do you follow your father? Is that dogma?
So, if I may...
Did your father give you a choice to eat what you wanted to eat? Why did you eat what your father ate?
So the point is that...
But that's the point. You followed.
So if we follow...
You're part of a medical discipline. You're a dentist. Do you do what the dentist board or authority tell you to do?
In a way.
What do you mean in a way? You can't deviate from it.
There's the external following of the rules,
Yeah.
which is dogmatic, but then there's dogma.
Why is it dogma?
But if you're just following it blindly, not knowing what's happening, so if I expand on the point that if
Well, you haven't expanded, you haven't defined what dogma is.
It's following something for the sake of following it from external point of view.
You follow so many laws in this country.
Yeah.
Do you know everything and why you're following it? Have you read all the law books that are in the library in the parliament? Because you're expected to follow them all, even without having read them.
Yeah.
That's true.
No one has read them. No one has read them, and everyone has to follow those laws.
There's a difference between following them for the sake of following or following them from an internal principle.
You like it or not like it. You don't like it, you're in jail.
So if you, yeah, that's fair enough. But
Yeah,
if you
fair
don't
enough.
like it,
So you have to follow
but
it.
you might be let off if you're ignorant of it.
No, you're not let off. It's your responsibility. It's your responsibility. They don't let you off. Your business is to know. Even though no one tells you, they haven't taught you the law in school, but still it's your duty to know what the laws are, despite the fact that they're voluminous.
But then why is it then that the individuals within ISKCON are not...
What's it got to do with this guy? You're following laws blindly. You're following the dogma of this country, by your definition. I call it just following the proper laws that are expected of every civilized person. It's not dogma.
So then how can we shift to doctrine and principles versus rules and regulations? Because that comes from inside, whereas things that are enforced...
No, it's not inside. This country doesn't care what you think inside. They have established laws, and you have to follow them.
Yes.
They don't care about what you think, and you're doing it. And you're subverting what you feel to what is decided in Parliament.
So if you have members...
So you're following dogmatically, even if you don't like it. You may not like it.
So is that good or bad?
Yes, it's good, because otherwise you don't have a society. Otherwise you have anarchy. And no one get anywhere. And the same thing happens in spiritual life. Everyone follows whatever they feel inside, but you're a conditioned soul. What do you know? So what did you know when you were a little kid? You know nothing. So if every child just does whatever they want, they never grow up, because they'll all poison themselves with chocolate cake and ice cream. They're not going to become healthy.
So I've got no objection with following rules and regulations. It's when you're not cultivating something inside.
You should know why you're following.
Yeah, so this is my point, is that...
Therefore, what do you think we have all these books for? We don't just have rules and regulations. Why are you fixated on rules and regulations? We've got 60, it appears to you because you haven't read any books. We have 60 books, which is a science of God. And if you want to perfect that science of God, just like if you want to go to school, you have to study. You don't have any choice. Do you?
Well, yeah.
Did you want to? You enjoy sitting and studying instead of doing what you feel like doing?
But we're at least tested, though. We're
Yeah,
tested in the educational system. So
yeah, and you get tested.
There's no system with.
Don't worry, you get the test. You'll get tested.
There's no particular test of, say, okay, we've got these 4 regulative principles, but there's nothing that is systemized to make sure that people are growing, so those desires are actually just echoes of the desire. It's just a case of, there you go deal with it if you can.
I don't understand. What's the problem? Is the 4 principles?
So we've got the chanting on one side,
Yeah.
which is...
So you chant, and there's a science to chanting, and if you want to know the science, then you read the books. And there's a corresponding conduct. Just like if you want to be successful in school or education, you have to study. If you want to party all the time, you're not going to get anywhere. You're going to fail. So there's a corresponding conduct to get a corresponding type of result. If you want to get the most out of education, you have to apply yourself.
So would you say it's better to know why you're following the rule than just following the rule?
It's compulsory to know why you're following the rules.
So how is it we go from just following the rule to knowing...
By studying, by understanding why the rules are there.
So
And that's what the knowledge is.
So that's what you're proposing that?
That's what, no, I'm not proposing it, that's what we're doing.
That was pretty
We
clear.
educate people in the knowledge of Krishna consciousness. And they understand that they want to follow these rules, and they do them voluntarily. Unlike you, there's no one in Parliament who's telling you that you have to become a Hare Krishna, unfortunately. So you're not being forced. This is done voluntarily. But you're not doing anything voluntarily, you're being forced to follow certain laws. You can't decide you're not going to drive on this side of the road. You're going to do it on the other side because it feels better.
But those are external rules. The Krishna consciousness teaches you how to, it makes you think in a certain way, it changes the way you think and behave.
External rules change how you think.
Yeah, and that's a concern, that the way it changes us internally, it makes us very susceptible to when there is...
It makes you sane. Because right now your external behavior makes you insane. Because your external behavior means that you have unrestricted sex life, that you go to the disco, that you get intoxicated, that you drink. That doesn't change how you behave and think. It hasn't changed the direction in which society is degrading. Why is society going down in terms of levels of consciousness, in terms of conduct, in terms of mental health? Because of the way people are behaving. And because society is becoming more and more so-called free. And becoming more and more free becomes you become more and more like animals.
Okay. And just on that point, I think I'd like to lead in straight to our qualified psychotherapist here. So the point that Mara just made was that not following these rules actually leads to insanity, uncontrolled sex desire. So Chaitanya Leela's point is suppressing sex desire actually causes psychological problems within society.
She followed her parents too, same parents as them.
Chaitanya.
She was forced to follow them.
So I just want to sort of present this sort of first idea, which is actually that sex desire is natural to humans. It can be considered that if one was to restrict or negate the sex desire, it's almost like cutting off a limb. Just like we have the desire to eat and the desire to, we have this natural physical urge to drink, to eat, that there is also this natural physical urge for sex pleasure. Now,
How much do you eat a day?
maybe three times a day.
But how much quantity? Do you eat like 10 kilos a day?
No.
So eating is restricted, right? Otherwise, if you eat too much, it's not good.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't eat, it's not good. So we agree, sex life is there, kamosmi, Krishna says. But if you have too much sex life, then you'll get sick.
But also, I just want to...
And if you don't have any sex life, if you can do that, then it'll be very good. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, that's the idea, to stop it altogether. But you'll have to do it to restrict it. Just like if you can cut your eating down minimally, then that's best.
Can I sort of understand this point a little bit more, which is just understanding the difference between humans and animals? See, animals are what's sort of considered seasonal breeders or opportunistic breeders, where conditions in the environment need to be a certain way for them to actually procreate. However, when we look at humans, we can see that they can breed and procreate throughout the whole year. So this would...
Is that what humans are supposed to be doing?
But this would, I mean, it's
just because they're able to do that, is that what they're supposed to be doing? What are they supposed to be doing?
Why is that the difference between humans and animals?
No, that's not the difference between... The difference between humans and animals is that animals can't stop breeding and humans can't. That's also a difference. Is that human has the ability to control their mind and senses. And that's what humans are meant to be doing. So how do you know how humans are supposed to breed? How will you determine?
Well,
just because humans are smarter than others, or other animals, do they have the right to slaughter and eat other living entities just because they happen to be smarter? So, no.
I understand that point, but it comes back to the point that actually...
But how do you know? Who's to say?
Who's to
so
say?
Who's to say? Who's to say what humans' function in breeding is? What does it mean? So as far as we're concerned, as far as our scriptures state, God says that sex life is for procreation, period. Mm-hmm. It's not for entertainment, it's not for once a week, twice a day, 5 times a day, whatever you can do. Mm-hmm. It's solely for one purpose, and that's for bringing, and not even just procreation, because that's animals. Mm-hmm. But human beings is to actually bring liberated souls or persons who can attain liberation into this world. Namochayata samapettum rityum. So human beings are meant to actually bring children in this world who will attain a higher state of consciousness, or preferably even a perfected stage of consciousness. Now you can argue about it as much as you want, but ultimately, how do you know? Either you just keep speculating according to a madman's theory, Freud, or you listen to God.
So there is this standard in Krishna consciousness that, you know, sex is actually for bringing in, you know, what you say.
Which doesn't mean no sex life. Sure. It just means that's what it's for.
So so if I can understand, there is a particular standard, okay, that you're presenting, that sex life is only for sort of bringing in certain souls, or, you know, having children. Now, this is my main point, actually, that different individuals have different levels of sexual appetite. Now, trying to live to a certain standard, which is actually quite high according to the rest of society, where
this is human standard.
Yes, but we live in a society where humans are
no longer humans. I mentioned the minimum. Better than the minimum is no sex life. And ultimately, everyone should come to that by the age of 50. The finished. Because sex life means you become conditioned to thinking that you're this body. And as long as you keep having sex life, you cannot actually differentiate between the body and the soul.
But is your expert medical opinion that it can lead to psychological problems?
Yes, this is the point that I'm getting.
Lead to psychological problems? All you people are crazy. What do you mean leading psychological problems? All these people running around like rats and rabbits are already crazy. They're already behaving in a crazy way. It doesn't lead to psychological problems. I don't have any psychological problems. I haven't had any kind of contact with a woman for 45 years.
So that may be.
But I'm your guinea pig right here. I don't have a problem.
Okay.
You've got a lot of problems, psychological problems with people who have unrestricted sex. You don't run across too many people who are not having any sex. You got people who are having sex life daily. And people get more and more. Why? Because everything they see everywhere is based on sex. Television, movies, advertisement, toothpaste, whatever it is, it's all to do with sex. Why? Because you're a sex-obsessed society. And that's why you got a job. Because so many people are so messed up. I could have used the word screwed up, but so many people are so messed up because of unrestricted sex.
I'm not denying the fact.
And there's consequences of that unrestricted sex, which is becoming worse and worse and worse. It wasn't like this when I was your age or even younger. And as society is becoming more and more promiscuous, therefore it's spreading not between just opposite sex, but same sex, and so on, and sex is like the main thing, like who's going to use the bathroom. It becomes like a major social issue.
I'm not. Can I just?
I'm gonna let you make.
ahead.
I'm gonna make one last point, yeah, and then I'm gonna move on.
Okay, so I understand. I'm not denying that individuals have a lot of sexual activity do not also have problems, but I want to present this issue that actually there is a standard that if you consider humans not to be humans when they're not actually living to this standard, but there is a difference between what level they are at and the standard that you're presenting.
Because you're not training people, you're not educating people. You're letting children, young adults, and then adults run wild. They're not being trained what it means to be a civilized human being. Everyone is being systematically brainwashed to be simply part of a mad consumer society where the only thing that counts is results. And therefore, you need psychiatrists, because people are so pressured to produce results rather than actually realize their true spiritual potential and not place so much emphasis on material results, but how they actually succeed in becoming lovers of God in this world.
When people are
you need training. People need training. Right now they're being trained to be one thing, but you're not training them to be human beings. Just because you walk on two legs doesn't make you a human being.
In this process of training, there is a suppression of this sex desire. And now
it's called controlling sex desire.
But when there is
you control so many things. There's so many people have urges. You've got all these men with the urges to go into a bar and to kill 50 people. Should that be suppressed or not?
I mean, it should.
Should it be suppressed? If someone has a desire
I think
to
it probably
cheat
should be
somebody
suppressed.
else, that should be suppressed.
It will come out in other areas.
No, it has to be purified, not suppressed. You only suppress things when you can't purify them. And those desires, just like sex desire, ultimately becomes purified. But because you don't know the purificatory process, therefore all you can do is talk about is suppressing things.
Can I just ask one?
You're gonna get another shot. Don't worry. I'm gonna come back to you.
Okay.
Okay. So on the theme of sexual freedom and liberation, we had Anand, someone here. Okay. So Anand. So his point was the Hare Krishna movement only appealed to hippies and the counterculture at a point when people were...
What are you doing here? You're not a hippie.
And what's your answer?
Okay, so the Krishna consciousness movement, it came to the West around the 60s. It came from this principle of the Bhakti movement from the 16th century, but that was just in India. And I think it's very convenient how it came to the West at a time when the world was filled with a real boom in materialism and militarism. If you look at the Cold War, this really put a lot of people in society off materialism and stepping away from this culture of education through the system.
You're right.
And then all of a sudden, well, hey, the Hare Krishna has come along, and they, as these guys are rebelling, they're looking for a longing for truth, a utopian idealism. And all of a sudden, there is this movement where you see these guys who are dressed in robes and free, and they're completely different from the society.
That's right, they're looking for alternatives.
Yeah. So I just find it very convenient that this movement, which never existed in the West before, all of a sudden comes.
The West never existed before. If you want to know it historically, if you want to go back, that West didn't exist 300 years ago.
Fair. And I think if...
It came from a culture that's existed for millions of years.
True, and
and they've been practicing it there for millions of years.
So if the movement came 300 years ago, when there wasn't this whole, this rebellion against society, it wouldn't stand the ground.
There's always rebellion against society. People are always rebelling. There's rebellions over here. It started... Magna Carta is one of the recorded rebellions, and there's so many rebellions since then. But that's the right thing. You're saying that in terms of mass interest in alternative life often comes when masses of people become frustrated with the status quo and they realize that material solutions are problems and that they're cheating them and they want something more substantial in life. Now that also goes on an individual level constantly. People constantly come to that. So you have these waves in terms of social evolution and society turning. You have a whole Christianity, you have a whole continent, subcontinent actually turning to Christianity because of political facilitation. Same thing, India all of a sudden becomes Buddhist for a certain period of time. But that's fine, there's nothing wrong with that. The real thing is, what is it that they're taking up? Are they really taking up that's giving an alternative to material values, and is it making people happy? It's got nothing to do with hippies, it's got nothing to do with anyone else. This has been going on since time immemorial. It's the natural function of human beings that ultimately, when you become a little smart, you realize that you can't be happy simply trying to enjoy your senses, whatever it's with.
And if there wasn't this mentality that was being developed, in the late 60s, psychedelics became a huge thing. People went to LSD, and they went to all these drugs where all of a sudden, the concept of reality had changed. There was this profound
It has nothing to do with it happens all the time. It's not to do with drugs, or it's not to do with alcohol, it's not to do with hippies, it's not to do with the Renaissance or anything like that. There are certain times when material circumstances, Bhagavad Gita says, Artha Jignasur Artharti Jnani. When people suffer too much, when for some reason they become very inquisitive, then they look for higher things than the things which aren't giving them happiness.
You're saying yourself when they come, whereas a spiritual internal movement should be universal, and a lot of people don't take to it, and those who do are susceptible to this fantasy idealism of this is what we can give.
Universal doesn't mean that everyone has to take to it. Why should everyone take to it? You're talking about social phenomena that I responded to, but universally and all over time, other people have been taking to it because on an individual level, they've also come to the same conclusion. Diamonds are a universal reality. That doesn't mean that everyone's got a diamond in their pocket. So you pay the price. If you got the money for it, then you got diamonds, but otherwise diamonds are diamonds. So there's so many things that may be universal, that doesn't mean that everyone has to universally have one.
Wouldn't that be the concept of a...
Everyone can have one.
Okay.
But they don't have the training. They're not trained for that type of thinking. Therefore, only for when some reason they sort of break out of the mold, because they're in the wrong mold. So real human society and real spiritual life means educating people in a different way, educating them about what the purpose of life is, that it's more important who you are than what you are. Materialism means what you are is important, and spiritual life means who you are is important.
And people were looking for who they were.
People always want to know who they are rather than keep being told what they should be. And that's why you need psychiatrists. Because you don't allow people to be who they are, and therefore they're always frustrated. Talk about suppressed sex desire, it's about suppressed identity. No one tells me that I'm not this body. No one tells me, and no one helps me understand who I am. That's a horrible thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I think going back to the point of...
Isn't it horrible? How many years have you gone to school?
A couple.
Have you had any course about who you are?
No.
Don't you feel cheated?
Absolutely. Especially
That's why you're here.
My modules are very, very boring. But no, just the one point I want to make is it's
Okay,
the way
last
it's the
point
way,
on this.
it's the way the movement came about. So you know, it was
The movement didn't come about. The movement's been existing since time immemorial.
over there, and then now it's come here as stay.
Here it didn't exist.
So I mean, it existed before, and then in the '60s, all of a sudden, hippies take up to this concept because there was a guy who came, and there was also another guy called Allen Ginsberg who set up a rock concert. The rock concert happened. Everyone loves this idea.
But these are all circumstances. What's it got? These people aren't hippies, they're souls. They're living entities.
It's a convenient match at which it's...
It's a convenient match, but that's not a problem. That's not a problem. Prabhupada wasn't a hippie. Rupa Goswami is not a hippie. Lord Chaitanya is not a hippie. So Vyasadeva isn't a hippie. They may have long hair, but he doesn't not a hippie.
I think Anand's done.
So it's convenient. That's fine. It's convenient, but that doesn't detract from the fact that it's reality.
Do you think there was any basis of the trippy nature of these colourful deities that it just happened to appeal to these guys who'd like to get high on life? And then a lot.
Maybe, but when they came down, they had to also inquire. And they had good questions, and they had to be satisfied with those answers. It's not that everyone's just high on drugs and therefore they're taking to Krishna consciousness, but rather they're intelligent people. Most of these hippies you talk about came from upper middle class or upper class society. They're well-educated people, thinking people, and that thinking was put into practice in Krishna consciousness, so why not look at it from the other point of view, that these were very intelligent young men and ladies who, with their intelligence, actually found the teachings of Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, extremely appealing and satisfying, more so than what they found in other things that they learned.
Okay. Since your last comment was touche, I think that was when I knew it. That's when I knew it was time to move on. So one of the points that Maharaj made was that we're not the body. I want to move on to a very live topic now that is being very much discussed across ISKCON circles at the moment, and that is we're not the body and we're certainly not the clothes. And so I'd like to move on to Kishan, who would like to raise the argument that there is no need for Vaishnava clothing. And here he is in his Marks and Spencer's shirt, looking very smart. So Kishan, over to you.
It's actually Primark.
I can tell.
So my main argument is that Vaishnava clothing is not actually necessary for two reasons. My first reason is because we as preachers are meant to present Krishna consciousness in a way that's the most accessible to someone else, and Vaishnava clothing presents some sort of barrier to that. And my second reason is from my understanding of Srila Prabhupada's books and reading the Bhagavad Gita, there's no way that Krishna speaks about dress. Krishna speaks about the modes which dress falls into, but you can also have clothes that are in the mode of goodness that aren't necessarily dhotis or saris. And the principle it's like I'm not going to go back to Godhead just by not wearing a dhoti from my understanding. So that's my presentation.
In Srila Prabhupada's time, there was one of his disciples who grew a beard. And Prabhupada wanted him to shave it, and the devotee didn't want to. And finally they came and they met. He came to see Srila Prabhupada and said, Prabhupada, but it's just hair. And Prabhupada said, no, it's not hair. It's the principle. And now Prabhupada did this very rarely. And you can see it, it's in the conversations. He says, either you shave it or I reject you as my disciple. Because of the principle. Because you're rejecting the principle. The hair is not important. But the principle of what is Krishna consciousness movement representing, and ultimately we represent a culture. Culture means eating, it means music, it means dress. It's just like djembe drums and mridangas. You can use any kind of instrument. Ultimately we're chanting Hare Krishna, but we got a culture. So, sure, anyone can dress anyway, and we can do anything to preach and spread Krishna consciousness, but in the ultimate issue, what do you think? Krishna walks around in jeans in the spiritual world, or is it all the same? Where are we going? What is the goal? And how people dress, conditioned soul means that your circumstances influence your consciousness. And conditioned soul means that how you dress also influences your consciousness. And if you study what Srila Prabhupada talks about, when he talks about hair, as soon as devotees started to grow their hair, he says, now the hippie seeds are growing again. Why? And they may have, or they may not have. It might just that someone didn't cut their hair for a couple of months. But immediately, why? Because the externals do have something to do with what's going on inside. And if we examine Prabhupada, this is what Prabhupada did. Prabhupada didn't use fork and knife. Prabhupada wouldn't put on any Western clothes. He came and chanted Hare Krishna, and here we are.
It's interesting you bring up Srila Prabhupada, because I've got a list of quotes
Go
from
ahead.
Srila Prabhupada about how dressing in Western clothing is actually something that he didn't necessarily have anything against. So this is one example with one of his disciples. So Guru Gauranga Das says, speaking about clothes, Monsieur le President says that he has been to India and he understands that one dresses like this in India, but why would the disciples dress in America or in Europe in this way? Is it necessary? And Prabhupada says, no, it is not necessary. Dress you can have as you like, it doesn't matter, because dress is a dead thing. Real thing is that we want a living being who can understand. That is the real position.
And then after they understand, what do? So it's a fact, but you have to continue. In other words, it has to be in context. Prabhupada, when we're preaching, we don't emphasize people that, oh no, you immediately have to dress like this and put on tilak. But that doesn't mean we don't dress like this and put on tilak. And Prabhupada was standing there in front of Monsieur, and how did he look? So no, we don't. This is not the emphasis for preaching. The emphasis is chant Hare Krishna, read Bhagavad Gita, understand. And then when you understand, then if you like someone, generally people emulate someone they love. How does Krishna dress? Why does Krishna eat? And so many other things.
Well, on that point about how does Krishna dress, then should we also emulate Krishna wearing ankle bells and that kind of stuff? Like, I don't personally have any. So.
You can, when you get to the spiritual world, you can wear ankle bells.
So
Unless you happen to be a woman in this life, you can wear ankle bells. And if you do kirtan, you can put on ankle bells also.
But when I get to spiritual world, I could wear a dhoti then. Why do I have to wear one now?
Because it's called sadhan. For a sadhya, you have to do an appropriate sadhan. If you don't know how to put on a dhoti here, then how are you going to put one over there? So we do. And the real important answer to this argument is, what did Prabhupada do? Because Prabhupada said a lot of things in different circumstances, and then there's many quotes about not wearing karmic clothes also. So when I joined, well, at least when I moved into the temple in 1973, it was I remember driving the temple president around, because I don't think they had a car at that time, so I was visiting, then they'd ask me to drive him around, and he was telling me about how this whole big controversy is coming about devoting wear karmic clothes on book distribution. Up until then, everyone was wearing a dhoti. And by the time I moved in, then just the transition was taking place. I went out for a few weeks in devotee clothes, and then Prabhupada said, yes, you can wear karmic clothes. And we did. And we did it for years, and devotees still do it. There's no problem. But when they come back to the temple, what do? When devotees go home, they're working all day in the office. What should they do? Should they just stay in their Western karmic clothes? Why? Why? This is comfortable. This is natural. This is. You go with a pinstripe suit in front of the deities and offer arti. We weren't even allowed actually to go into the temple room in karmic clothes when we were young devotees. He said, as soon as you come back from Sankirtan, go take a shower, get dressed, put on tilak, what to speak of karmic clothing? What about tilak? Is tilak important or not? Of course we don't tell people, no, you immediately got to put on this stuff on your forehead. On the other hand, Prabhupada would quote, he said, someone who doesn't have tilak on their forehead is like a slaughterhouse. So there's so many different things. Well, what did Prabhupada do? Prabhupada came consistently, he was dressed like this, and he spread Krishna consciousness all over the world. He encouraged his followers to do this. Why something new? Certainly, for preaching we do it. I do it. I'm going next week to Turkey. I'll be going there in Western clothes. But once I get through the airport and everything, then I walk around like this. And everyone says marhaba, and they're very respectful. They think I'm some kind of Sufi or I don't know.
Final point. So you were speaking previously about principle. I always assumed that the principle is cleanliness rather than a certain type of cloth. And you're also mentioning
You change your clothes every day?
Yeah.
Pants, shirt, sweater. That's good. But the principle isn't just cleanliness. The principle is sadhu vartmanu gamanam, follow in the footsteps of the sadhus. So there was other type of clothing in Goswami's time. Muslims were dressed in a different way. There's always the clothing that devotees would wear, and there's all types of other fashionable clothes that non-devotees wore, even at that time. It isn't that this is just, Indian clothing. Indians do dress in other things, either both now and always in the past. But still, we have a certain type of Vaishnav dress, just like policemen wear police uniforms and priests wear certain clothing, and so on. Why? Because it facilitates our consciousness, it gives us a stronger sense of self-identity, it helps us communicate with others, it does help us communicate with others, and it does give results. It gives results.
Does anyone in the audience care to disagree with what's being said?
I can give you an example. I mean here, but say I went to Hungary. First I started going just during communist regime, karmic clothes for 2 years, but after that I went in dhoti. Now there's tens of thousands of people Krishna conscious in Hungary. I never wore Western clothes. I didn't have to dress up for anything. And I can talk to anybody, practically speaking, except today's Prime Minister, for different reasons. But aside from that, I can talk to anybody like this.
Nimachandra.
Certainly don't want to debate, but I just want to ask a question in relation to this. I certainly don't claim that I've read everything, but from the things I've read and where it references kind of what Krishna wears, etc., normally you hear that he wears yellow garments. And I just wanted to confirm, or get you to confirm, that it's actually stated scripturally that dhoti is, or is that kind of something that's just made up?
I've never seen the word dhoti. I've certainly seen the word choli for Srimati Radharani and Brijbasi ladies. But once again, for me, when Srila Prabhupada, who's an emissary from the spiritual world, when he sees all of these pictures, and he's telling us this is the way Krishna looks, and he's not just talking about Krishna's complexion or the flute, it includes how Krishna's dressing, then why all of a sudden, after 40 years or 50 years, introduce some kind of new concept? It does say clothes, and in Bhagavad Gita doesn't say that Krishna doesn't talk about clothing, but then Krishna doesn't talk about so many things that are self-evident, that are obvious.
You're mentioning about following in the footsteps of the acharyas. So I've heard that once Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj served meat, served fish to some of his guests. So if we're on the line of following...
But what did he do? Did he eat fish and so on?
No.
I don't think he ate it. He said it could be done. I don't know any example of it doing it, but even if he did, but what did he do? And how did he dress? And he dressed his disciples in the type of Christian black robes when he wanted to impress the governor. Besides that, he continued on dressing as a proper sannyasi, and so did his disciples. They're not running around in black robes right now. All of the Gaudiya Math dressed like this.
So if someone chose not to wear it but followed everything else, are they not reaching something that someone who dresses in that appropriate way?
Depends on the principle. If there's really, really good reason, but that's why I just brought up that example. It depends if it's the principle. Am I rejecting something that's part of Krishna conscious culture just because I want to be an individualist? Or are circumstances, bona fide circumstances, obviating me from dressing like that? If the circumstances, then there's no problem. There's devotees all over the world and Muslim countries and so on that can't do that. And they're going to go back to Godhead for preaching in Muslim countries. But on the other hand, if someone's rejecting Srila Prabhupada's personal example just in order to try to make some unnecessary point, which isn't necessarily making any more devotees and making anybody any more Krishna conscious, then it isn't. It may be a hypothetical idea that is good to approach people, but I'd like to see the result from that.
Okay, so I'd like to stick on the theme of culture. And Marge, as I said at the beginning, is an author, and one of his most recent books is about Varnashram. So Ravi here believes that in the 21st century, modern day times, you can dress like this, but there's no time for Varnashram. So would you like to expand on why you believe that Varnashram doesn't work in society today?
Does everybody know what Varnashram is? I guess that's probably the first thing.
It's a very
Does
good
anybody
thing to
who doesn't
start.
know what Varnashram is?
I think you should define it anyway.
Essentially, it's kind of like, we've spoken a lot about society, which feeds on nicely to this, because this is the ideal society which has been ordained by Krishna. And it works on the principle of 4 occupations and 4 ashrams. I won't go into detail about what those kind of things are, but essentially, the point is you're supposed to really understand your true nature, and by figuring that out, you can lead a very successful life in that pursuit, as opposed to going around and doing all sorts of different things and then figuring out that it didn't work out for you. My first point to you, Maharaj, is that Varnashram and ISKCON work in 2 very different sociological aspects. From what I've understood, Varnashram is very much an open forum. There's no kind of fixed parameters. It's very introspective. There's guidance from the Brahmanas. But the onus is on the individual. Whereas in ISKCON uses a very institutionally corporate model. Even though Prabhupada tried to move away from
Varnashram is not a subjective affair. Varnashram is institutional. It's a greater institution of society, and a society that's established by Vedic literature. So Dharma Shastra establishes the social structure for human beings, and the social structure that Krishna creates, tasya kartaram apimam. He says, I've created this system.
I'm talking more about the principle of a dictatorship, that kind of system.
It's a dictatorship.
Okay.
Varnashram is based upon monarchy, and it's a benevolent dictatorship. Monarchy means benevolent dictator.
Okay. But the point I was trying to make was that the central command in ISKCON in itself is, I guess, a very different sociological context for Varnashram to work. And my question is, don't you think it's a bit irresponsible, perhaps a bit too soon, to implement a system like Varnashram in ISKCON, which requires a massive cultural shift before it even...
It doesn't require a massive shift. I mean, half of Varnashram has been going on in ISKCON ever since ISKCON's been here. You've had ashrams. And you've accepted the principle of ashrams, that there's brahmacharis, grihasthas, vanaprasthas, sannyas. And in the way that Srila Prabhupada has defined the general duties of those ashramas, we've accepted that. And it means that they have rights, they have obligations. So we've accepted the ashram part. So if you accept one part of it, why not accept the other part? But of course, that's not the main reason. The main reason, because that's what Prabhupada said. So Prabhupada wanted, this is the international society for Krishna consciousness. So if this is a society, what's the society's social model? Institution is not a social model. I mean, it establishes a social model, but it has to have some kind of foundation. It has to have a constitution. So what's the constitution? Call it institution, call it society, but what's the basis? So society means that people have rights and they have obligations. They have specific roles that they play in society. So who's to determine that? So Krishna determines that for human society.
Krishna also says that this is, or even Prabhupada said in a quote that Varnashram will be the stepping stone to spiritual life. In other words, it's actually, I guess you could say it's the bridge aspect of Krishna consciousness.
So many things are a stepping stone to Krishna consciousness. Just like
the focus on this stepping point, on Varnashram and
but you have to have. If you don't have a stepping point, how do you get to spiritual life? Spiritual life means loving Krishna.
Yeah, but that's not the stepping point.
Yeah, spiritual life means loving Krishna. Right. And in order to learn how to love Krishna, you have to have a properly functioning society. So, same thing. Why do you do sadhana? That's a stepping stone, stepping point.
But then I could argue that the first...
Arjuna doesn't chant Hare Krishna. He doesn't chant rounds.
But then I could say, well, Prabhupada...
But that's your stepping. You have to do that in order to get there. So, similarly, just like Gorkishordas Babaji, he didn't have counter beads, and what was that other Avadhuta at that time? Vamsidas Prabhu didn't even chant rounds. But that's what you do. Well, that's on the perfectional platform. But to get to the perfectional platform, then you perform sadhana.
But doesn't kind of applying Varnashram to our society mean that we have to...
Your conditioned soul.
But I mean,
Varnashram sets up the conditions.
That's the problem. Who decides who's a conditioned
Krishna.
soul and who isn't? I mean, on a practical basis, Krishna's not going to come and tell me. I mean, I know I am, but he's not going to tell me that.
Therefore, everyone follows. Krishna says.
But even those who are...
Even Krishna follows. He says, even I follow, to set the example. So Prabhupada follows, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, they're all transcendentalists, but they still follow.
But just so Prabhupada didn't follow.
You can argue that, but that's not a fact.
Prabhupada set up ISKCON 50 years ago, and when he, in those 12 years that he was on the planet, he said, go and build a printing press, go and open a temple in Timbuktu,
and he said establish.
But he didn't kind of consider, well, is that in that person's nature? But they did it, and we have a printing press, correct, and we have temples.
Correct. And then Prabhupada said, now you need to also work on establishing a society, and people should learn how to act according to their nature. Prabhupada certainly engaged people according to their natures. Said, you want to associate with a girl? Okay, you get married. That's called being a grihasta. And now you have to follow these principles. So, but you have to, if you talk about Prabhupada, then you have to study what Prabhupada said, and then you have to do what Prabhupada said. And Prabhupada very emphatically, as he saw that his printing press and his temples and his deities and the devotees and so many other things were starting to get established, Srila Prabhupada then started to, just like Prabhupada didn't introduce restaurants in 1966, he introduced them in 1973, 1974. Prabhupada didn't introduce Radha Krishna deities right away. He introduced them in 1969.
That wasn't because he was waiting for Varnashram to establish. That was just circumstance, manpower,
no,
qualification.
It was qualification. That's right. They weren't qualified. They weren't ready. So at a certain point, when the basics of Krishna come, you can't establish a society when you don't have people, unless you have the spiritual basis, unless you have the scriptures, unless you have the training set up. Prabhupada had limited time. And there's a lot of things to do. So, but you can't argue it because it's what Prabhupada said.
So you're agreeing that because Prabhupada had a limited time, that Varnashram took a second seat, kind of on the bench, while the mission was propagating?
It was second seat. It was a second seat. There were different stages. Is the 10th floor second seat to the first floor of a building?
So the first floor was chanting Krishna.
First you start establishing. You put everything into its proper perspective, and you develop things.
So there's that quote, that, you know, the 50-50 quote, that Prabhupada's first mission was 50% of his
So
mission.
now what are you doing about the other 50%?
So my question would be that is chanting Hare Krishna the same as doing Varnashram?
You can't chant Hare Krishna without Varnashram. That's the problem.
Then how have we been doing it? For 50 years?
Huh?
How have we been doing
With
it
a
for 50
fence.
years? Everybody.
Not everybody.
Well, there's a
But
large portion that wouldn't.
but why is the great majority of them falling down? Why are the great majority of them not chanting and dancing in ecstasy?
Because they're working.
Huh?
Because they're working. Because they're grahastas.
Working, not working.
Not everybody's in the temple.
That's
not
a detail.
everybody's full-time
Prabhupada
devotees.
worked. Prabhupada worked.
I think the kind of the demography of the society now is a lot different to back then. It's not a case they're not.
The principle is that when you're a conditioned soul, unless the conditions are set up so that they're favorable, then it becomes much more difficult to chant Hare Krishna properly. So why does Krishna talk about the types of foods to eat? He may not talk about dress, but he talks about foods. Why? Because you are what you eat, and the types of food that you eat affects your consciousness. Similarly, the types of work that you do, the types of lifestyle that you live, and unless you know what are actually the duties, what is the proper conduct of a grihasta? We're talking about controlling sex life. Is it restriction? Does it cause frustration? Or actually, along with chanting Hare Krishna, is it a necessary thing? Otherwise, if you don't control it, then you'll become degraded. And you will be offensive.
Just one last point. It's kind of it's about demotivation when it comes to Varnashram, and I guess everybody here, you know, they're at different levels of education, of work, of career, and it seems that if you apply Varnashram to our lives, it could be a very demotivating factor. And I'd like, for example, in your seminars, you said that if something is in one's nature, it comes.
It's rightly motivating. It's one thing to be tricked and fooled to try to be what you're not and waste your life, and it's something else to actually be what you are.
Okay.
The question is whether you've been trained to be humble enough to accept what you are.
Okay, I'll give you an example then. J.K. Rowling, the author of Harry Potter.
What a waste of time. Absolute trash. She won't, because she got rich. But it's a complete waste of time, bewildering innocent children and simply misleading them as to what the goal of life is, to really live in a fantasy world that you can call religion, that has no relevance to reality and that just contaminates children's view on life and what life is all about.
That's a very cult way to present.
Huh?
I would think that's a very culty thing to say in regards to an author.
It's not cult, it's called truth. When you hear the truth, when you hear a truth, you call it cult. But that's the truth.
I mean,
because
you know, before I came to Krishna consciousness, I watched the Harry Potter films, and I mean,
and therefore that trash is still in your head. Because once it goes in, it has its effect, and because that's
my point is
it gets so much more difficult to get Krishna in.
I got to get to my point, but my point essentially
was... The thing is, the children should be hearing Krishna book, and Srimad Bhagavatam, and Chaitanya Charitamrita. There's so many things, the unlimited Puranas, things that purify them, not things that contaminate them and waste their human form of life, especially in their formative years. Because once they're contaminated, therefore, they're gone. So your rollings is actually a instrument in the hands of the material energy to continue destroying the fiber of our society.
There are worse people than J.K. Rowling.
Huh?
I think there are worse people than J.K. Rowling.
There are worse people, but she's also bad.
I wouldn't say she's bad.
She may not think she is.
I said she's not Krishna conscious.
Okay, I think we need to move on from J.K. Rowling. We can tell you're a fan.
I'm sure she'll love listening to this.
Make the point.
The point essentially is this: that before Harry Potter came around, just hear me out. It's the point.
Harry Potter, Shakespeare, it's all trash.
No. I agree, it's trash.
Yes.
All goes to Bhagavad Gita. But my point is that before she became successful in writing Harry Potter in the film, she had a lot of failure. She came to a lot of obstacles. A lot of producers said it's
and now she's a bigger failure.
So my point is...
Now she's a bigger failure because she's made other people fail also. and she's contributing to millions of children failing their mission of life. That's success.
In Varnashram, if I was...
That's exactly what she should do. She should be mopping the floors instead of writing books.
Okay, Marge, if I personally was trying my best to achieve something and I came across stumbling blocks, would you then say, well, it's not in your Varna to be an author, it's not in your Varna to do this because you've come to failure? Or would you see, well, actually failure is a stumbling block to success?
What's success?
Well,
What? Success in what? This is not a context. It's not entertaining kids, it's destroying kids. You see it as entertainment. Is Hitler famous? Is he successful?
I don't.
Okay.
What would be the difference? Sorry, what would be the difference? Just going on this, if there's a blue boy who's in a spiritual world and he will attain you perfection in life, what would be the difference if J.K. Rowling wrote that Harry Potter was a wizard who could give you all these exact same conditions?
We don't need J.K. Rowling. You've got Srila Vyasadeva, you've got so many authors, you've got so many books. Why do you need speculation when you've got the truth? Because you're not given this. Because you're not given the truth.
So if I argue that Krishna is a speculation, Harry Potter is the real form, it's your word, but in reality it's your word against mine.
But it's not a word against mine. It's you think about Harry Potter, you become Harry Potter in your next life. I'll think about Krishna, I'll go to Krishna in my next life.
We've really got to move on from Harry Potter. I just wanted to open it up to the crowd, but please nothing on the same theme. But does anyone have any particular questions or challenging points you want to... Is it still on the sex point? Okay, so before we come back to
obsessed.
that... I'm gonna go with the brother first, and then... Actually, no, yes, someone new. Yeah, please.
In regards to what Ravi was saying about Varna, we are following it to some degree in Islam. I think the misunderstanding is that the GBC is supposed to be Kshatriyas, but they're actually the Brahmanas. And then like the temple presidents, there's like one temple president in each temple. And then there's the Vaishyas that contribute a lot of money towards the temples, and then the majority is Shudras. So that's still going on in a way.
Varnashram is not just about determining who's a Varna, what Varna someone's in, or what someone's ashram in. It's the codes of life, the rules by which we live. And the rules by which we live that's established according to, because you have different rules, according to different Varna and different ashram. So a man and woman, if they're grihastas, then it's religious for them to associate alone. Man and woman, if the man is a sannyasi, then it's irreligious. Both circumstances are identical, but for different people, what's sin for one person is actually a religious activity for someone else. So, but to know actually what is religious and what is sinful on the basis of what God has given human beings in order to live to perfect life, not in order to waste their time in economic development, but in to develop life in terms of self-motivation in the spiritual field, self-control, to actually learn self-control and to cultivate self-control. So what rules do we live by? What is right? What kind of food should we eat? What kind of dress should we wear? What kind of work should we do? And then this also comes in, is that people have natures. So for instance, do we need all of our educational institutions? No. We could just burn them all down, and practically speaking, if you've got one university in this country, that's enough. That's all you need. Because only that many people really deserve to be in university. Everyone else is being forced to go there. And even if they go, the end result is, what do university graduates do? They can't get jobs. So unless you keep on making all kinds of and inventing all kinds of useless things and try to motivate people to keep buying those useless things that people keep using their developed intelligences for. But in the meantime, everyone is getting misled from the real purpose of life. Instead of keeping life simple, we think that this is actual progress. Why? Because once again, we don't follow Varnashram. Society does not have a direction. Or rather, its direction is exploitation and sense gratification and economic development. That's the goal. And we're not into economic development, we're into spiritual development. And we're satisfied with everything being at just what you need, not what you want. So learning how to live by what you need, rather than satisfying all of your desires, requires training. And that's what Varnashram gives. But it has to start with children. And that's why they shouldn't read Harry Potter, because they waste their time.
So we're into spiritual development, not economic development. We obviously need to be following the right people. So I just wanted to go to Kula Shekhar Prabhu, who had a question about whether you need to be a self-realized person in order to liberate your disciples. So do you want to expand on that?
You wrote a book in 1999 called The Shiksha Guru, analyzing
I'm just thinking if it was 99, but I guess it was.
I think it said in the,
Yeah, maybe even earlier. Go ahead.
So basically describing the different roles and cooperation between Diksha Guru, the initiating spiritual masters, and instructing spiritual masters, Shiksha Guru. So given the current position of the mentorship system in the UK, where predominantly most devotees are being mentored by mentors, and they have a Diksha Guru elsewhere. I remember at one point you commented that the mentors have to take responsibility for the fact that they're actually acting as Shiksha Gurus. So it's my understanding that we need to understand the thing quite clearly. And there's one comment in the appendix 5 towards the end, where you address the question, can a non-liberated Diksha Guru, can he make the grave commitment required to direct his disciple back to Godhead? And you said that the answer is yes. And there's a large body of evidence in Prabhupada's books and in Shastra to indicate that actually the answer is no.
Do you want me to answer that? Or elaborate on it?
Well, I have some, yeah, I mean, basically, my understanding, my point is that when Krishna says, Evam Param Parapratam, Imam Rajash Yoga, Sakalene Mahata, Yoga Nashta Parantapa. He says, Yoga Nashta Parantapa, that the yoga is what's destroyed, is what's become disjointed. He doesn't say Shastra Nashta Parantapa, because the Shastra was always there. But the connection, the self-realized connection of the individual soul with the Supreme is what became broken, and that's what he came to re-establish. And in Mahaprabhu's case, Mahaprabhu came to establish Prema Bhakti. So he's got no business to come and instruct a particular type of sadhana, because the sadhana was already explained in Shastra. Chanting of the holy names is the sadhana for this age. But unless a person comes who is experiencing Prema Bhakti, then that Prema Bhakti cannot be passed down through the chain of disciplic succession. So my argument is that in order to be actually called a person who's in the Quran...
Why does Prema Bhakti have to come in disciplic succession?
Because the disciplic succession, Evam Param Parapratam, means yoga.
But there Krishna is even talking about karma yoga. He's not even talking about prema yoga.
No, Krishna's talking about bhakti. He's leading to bhakti.
No, that's karma yoga. He's talking about the process of karma. Ivam Raja Vidu. But the issue is that prema is not restricted.
Yes.
You can't say prema has to come this way. Shuddha, Sattva, Visheshatma. Prema will come. It can come through a Vaishnava, it can come through Krishna. Ultimately, it comes through Krishna's will. It can also come through the holy name.
But the general system is to accept a self-realized spiritual master.
The general system is that you accept a self-realized spiritual master, but the more general system is that you accept spiritual masters, because history doesn't show that all spiritual masters were self-realized. Neither at Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's time, neither later. And especially for preaching, in other words, what Srila Prabhupada told us, what did Prabhupada say? So why did Prabhupada make devotees spiritual masters with the idea that, what, they're already self-realized? I don't think we have that idea.
So Krishna says, they say that all devotees are magnanimous souls because we're all making advancement in various stages. So any level of spiritual master can help another person make advancement, but that's not the specific point. The specific point is whether a non-liberated guru can liberate his disciple. It's accepted that any devotee who has a higher level of realization can help elevate somebody who has a lower realization.
The liberation doesn't just come from the guru. It's like the idea that, oh, the guru takes the karma. Does the guru take the karma of the disciple?
No, I mean that's...
The guru takes some karma, books take karma, chanting takes karma, prasadam takes karma, circumambulating Brinda Devi takes karma, Tulsi Devi takes karma. Similarly, a spiritual master is meant to give guidance and direction. He may be first class, second class, third class. Prabhupada says if he's third class devotee, second class devotee, he's not so able to direct them in order to actually attain the goal. And that's a fact, because he doesn't have personal experience. But that doesn't mean that devotees don't necessarily attain that goal.
Yeah.
Because Krishna also says, Yoga Kshema Vahami Aham.
Can I just stop you there? Only because it's such a technical topic that I lost you at the question point, and it went straight over my head. So it might be one to take offline, but I just wanted to raise, if that's okay, just one other question that came in anonymously, but I think is very pertinent, and one which I think it'd be nice to finish on. And that was, the world is in a pretty messed up position at the moment.
Sure is.
And the Hare Krishnas, other than feeding a few people, are not doing anything to solve the real problems of life.
Well, we are solving the real problem of life. You define what the real problem of life is. If you say we're not solving, what is it?
Would anyone like to...
What problem of life are you talking about? The problem of life is birth, death, old age, and disease. And the solution to that is not feeding people or making people well. The ultimate solution is giving people the opportunity to get out of this material world. Now, that's the solution for material suffering.
Sure.
You mentioned about if you don't have an ashram, it's hard to chant Hare Krishna. So like people in poverty, they're not able to chant Hare Krishna because their material situation is so bad.
But you're not in poverty. You're not in poverty. So why bring it up?
No, but as a movement, we're not helping people in poverty. So then we're not really reaching out to everyone. We're reaching out to a certain...
Just start reaching out to the people that you can reach out to. We're feeding people. We're feeding lots and lots of people everywhere. But we can only do so many things, and as we do more things, as we grow, then we'll be able to do more and more things. But our main business is not feeding people. Feeding people is ancillary to spreading Krishna consciousness. Our main business is to give people Krishna consciousness so that once they've eaten, they know what to do. And that they should chant Hare Krishna, and they should follow our principles of Krishna consciousness.
Perfect. Vrindavan.
Regarding Varnashram, as my understanding is legally Brahmanas will get punished less than, say, Vaishyas or Shudras. So then the exiled or the Shudra will be killed. So that seems unfair, because if you're in a position of responsibility, you should get more punishment rather than less. And secondly, it seems like that whole system is prone to corruption.
Everything's prone to corruption. You're living in a corrupt world. You show me something that's not corrupt. Everything's prone to corruption, but what's the ideal? Monarchy is prone to corruption. Spiritual life is prone to corruption. Gurus are prone to corruption. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. And that type of, when we talk about Varnashram, in terms of classical Varnashram and the type of Varnashram that Prabhupada talked about are somewhat different. But you have to accept the fact that you have to work out a Varnashram system that actually respects the principles, but at the same time works. and is relevant.
How would you explain that the Brahmins getting punished less in that system?
Generally, when you talk about Brahmins getting punished, that doesn't mean that the Brahmins were sinful. You talk about Brahmins as actually being exceptionally pious, if they're proper Brahmanas, and therefore it's rare for them to perform some type of sinful activity. Whereas other people may be more prone because they're in a different mode of material nature. So just like children. When children steal and adults steal, do you punish them equally? No. Why? Because there's different expectation. So generally speaking, and that's generally speaking, because it's not that Brahmins weren't also punished in the same way. So if you read Srimad Bhagavatam, Arjuna was ready to kill Ashvatthama. He was a Brahmin. So similar, and of course it was in a battle, but in the battle they killed Dronacharya, and he was a Brahmin. Of course, that's because they were acting in that particular capacity. So it's not just our perception of what right and wrong is, or what is fair and what's not fair, but in a properly functioning society where different people have different duties and they have different levels of responsibility, and by their natures they're less prone to be sinful. If you're talking about punishment, then you'll find that those in the low modes of nature will be much more inclined, and that's where it will be taking place. Whereas with Brahmins, it will be the exception. And because it's the exception, then the punishment was less. Same thing with women. Same thing with old people. Same thing with children. Their punishment is also different. Less. They're also, in fact, sometimes it's not punished. But that's a general statement, because there are many examples where Brahmins are punished. They're driven away, and there's so many stories and Puranas of evil Brahmins. It wasn't that they're just allowed to go around being evil. But still, because they're Brahmins, the principle also has to be taken into consideration. And that's why ultimately Arjuna didn't kill Ashvatthama. Because, all right, he's a Brahmin. So we should do something that's equivalent to killing him, which is to humiliate him, but actually don't take his body. So it's a complex system that brings in so many different norms that are very different than the norms that we live in today. One of them is this idea of achieving. Being achievers, and everyone should be encouraged to achieve their full potential. By definition of today's society, full potential means what you want, not rather what you should have.
Okay, so I think we're going to call time on there, but so the Varnashram system is very complicated. So what we ideally need is someone who has had 45 years experience in Krishna consciousness to write a book on it, which we can then purchase and learn about. So fortunately for us,
this is just one book. This is just about, and this is just, it is very complicated. Varnas, ashrams are very simple, but how that actually applies today, what it is that Srila Prabhupada wanted from us is quite challenging. So this is just one in a series.
So the books are there on the table, and I believe...
No, you said it.
Okay. So Ravi wanted to say something nice about the books, but if you just hold it... There you go. So thank you very much, Maharaj, for an enlivening debate. And
thank you, it was very good, considering it was Nirjala Ekadashi, and a lot of devotees were fasting, which got some levels of energy.
Yeah, when that last question came up about feeding people, I was really struggling, has to be said. So can we thank Maharaj in the usual way with 3 loud Hari Bols?
Hare Krishna. Jai
Shri Maharaj ki. Jai Srila Prabhupada ki.
Jai Srila Prabhupada ki jai.